Okay, good afternoon. I'm Anto Budiardjo. This is Monday Live. Welcome to our conversation. This is something that we do every Monday afternoon at 3 p.m. as we try and figure out the future for smarter buildings. So it's really good to have you with us today. In case you're wondering who we are, profiles are listed on mondaylive.org. And also, just to remind everyone, the views expressed here in this hour are personal, not of any company or organization. Just keep that in mind. Let's make this interactive with using the Zoom chat. That's always good when we do that with everyone. Looking forward to that. And if you need anything from the slide deck, it is also available on mondaylive.org right there on the homepage. So this being March, this is the third Monday in March that we are talking about governance. So we talk about governance as a sort of a general concept in the first Monday, and then we're just sort of evolving that conversation. And for the agenda today, we'll after our normal news and trends and chit chat, we'll talk about governance and focus today on the governance of data, what that's all about. I'm looking forward to that discussion. So before we get into that, I'm going to hand it over to Ken Sinclair for an update from automated buildings. Over to you, Ken.
Thanks, Anto. The governance and standards, that's basically our summary of last week's Monday. I think it was a good overview. Some good points have been pointed out. It led us to today's session, which is the governance of data. And I think as we make it easier and easier to get all of this data in one place, then we have to be concerned as to how folks are going to use that data. We're still promoting our thought leadership liaison where we want to get folks there. We're starting to get some traction. That 10,000 is just in that from last week. 1 week's summary of impressions is 10,000, and that's up about 12%. So we're reaching, somebody's reading their stuff. I'm not sure who they are. Down at the bottom there, convergence, governance, and the next layer of building performance. And that's an interesting one because it's a combination of two of our contributing editors kind of putting their heads together and putting together a post. So I think that's a good direction. It fits well with our theme. And I think that's the top words are pulled from one of Kimon's things there, as he says, without semantic layer describing those relationships, AI is forced to guess. And that's why we need semantic buildings with Cloud BIM, Azure 223P, and RDF. They can create machine-readable knowledge graphs of physical world that AI agents can actually reason over. I think that's a good point. If you click on that, it takes you to his post on LinkedIn, which is great, as does the one below where he is talking about scale and what he's got a stable of interviews that he's done there. He's bringing back from Scale, which was a open software convention that was close to where he lives. The one below next to that is one from Keith's people and what their ideas of how AI is working in this chiller optimization. They're working with some folks in Puerto Rico, and there's some really interesting. There's a stable of articles there that is extremely good. Next to that is the Open FDD, the new paradigm for smart buildings. This is from our new contributing editor, Ben, and it's great impact. There was over 2,000 impressions on it and still rising. There's a lot of interest in what he's doing, and I think he does a great job of explaining what it is he's doing and what software you can actually download from GitHub. Of course, we have all of our free education sessions are now online, and we're starting to generate our summaries of them, and we should have that all done relatively soon. So looking forward to today's session. Back to you, Anto.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Ken. Rick.
Yeah, I wanted to highlight a couple of different C4SB projects, and over on the right, notice that I added knowledge graphs in the list, and if you go to the next page, I was going to highlight a few different things that have caught our attention that we're focusing on over the near term. One of the things Ken just talked about that Kimon had written about was knowledge graphs of the PAE building, but I'm going to draw attention to this concept of open building graph, or the OBG, which is what I'm saying there. The open building graph, or the concept of a graph of the graphs that exist in a building or exist regarding a building, is something that we'll be highlighting a lot more of as we go through the next few weeks. And it just kind of created a list of interesting things for people to research or to read up on or click on some links. And one of them is this Netflix UDA, and over on the right, so there's a link of how you can go watch this description of what's happening at Netflix in terms of their unified data architecture, which is where they're bringing all the different systems that are relative to Netflix together into a unified knowledge graph, RDF-based data architecture. And it's an architecture that I think is going to work for this industry, and the fact that we can go look at what they're doing in some other industry is pretty useful. And then, we're going to see more and more about what the graph is of the PAE systems and data. And then the third thing on that bullet list there is addendum CT, which is this. I get the feeling that it's not widely known, or it's not widely talked about, that ASHRAE has issued this addendum CT, which is, I think, 135-2024 addendum CT, and I can try and find exactly that link, but it is BACnet. It's RDF for BACnet, or knowledge graphs for BACnet, and it's the guide for how BACnet can be, whether it's objects, devices, or properties, can be represented as knowledge graphs. And it seems to me that there's a lot of people that don't know that standard, or the proposed standard, is out there. So I wanted to bring some attention to that, and we'll be doing that over the next couple of weeks as well. I'm going to skip down to the link for the UDMI, where it says UDMI John Bro. UDMI is, as we talked about last week, is going to become a working group inside of C4SB, and I found this YouTube video where John Bro of Delta Computer actually does a really good job of explaining what UDMI is, and so I put that into this slide.
Okay. Thank you, Rick. Any comments on that?
Looks like a lot of good information.
Yeah.
Looking forward to poking through some of that stuff.
Well, that's one of the things we wanted to do, Ken, was to actually talk about it here on this segment, so that it makes its way into the AI and into the however you're capturing what's being talked about on Monday Live. So we want to start just dumping things into the record via this update.
Super.
Okay. Any other thoughts before we move on?
Actually, just before we move away from that, are you okay, Rick, if we actually make that part of the this week's summary page?
Absolutely. That was
yeah, okay, I think that would be useful.
great.
Yeah, we'll work out the details, but good. Thanks.
I have one more thought here, Anto, if it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I gave a keynote at the American Institute of Architects Technology Group here in Los Angeles last Friday. It was pretty interesting. because I haven't gone to the AIA in quite a few years out of frustration in many ways as an architect. But one thing that, in relating to today's session, one thing that I've seen, and we've seen this before, that we're talking about governance and data and access, and we're kind of treating it like we're consumers of this data, and how do we get to it, and how does it control to get to us? But to the architects, I actually flipped it around, and I've used this phrase before, but I'm formalizing it into a post. We are the architects of intelligence. In other words, we work in the physical world, and we create intelligent data that then needs to be accessible in a way that's governed, and that gives us sovereignty to that data. So we are the owners of the data. We're not just trying to get permission from others to use it. It goes both ways, but a lot of the discussions I hear out, especially relating to AI is about, oh, the data is over there and this large language model has it here. How do we control it? How do we get our IP managed? And I think we need to be more proactive and step forward into that. And that has to do with having the right governance and access. It's both, right? Like we've been talking about. So I will be posting. It's a 50-minute session that I've sliced up into 5 pieces relating to that. And I brought up C4SB. I showed PAE. I talked about the Monday Live 10x, 100x, 1000x growth of AI. I put that on screen, and people were kind of really surprised by that. I had a lot of discussions after that. Is that real? How do we deal with it? So anyway, it's a good starting point for discussions about where this is going and the pace of change.
Okay, it's great. Looking forward to that. Anybody else? Hearing none, we should move on to governance and governance of data. So it's kind of funny. We've been talking about on Monday Live for the past quite a few months. We've been talking about this, or specifically Steve has been talking about this. That's saying, "I want my damn data," and that's AI's rendering of a Steve. Looks like a younger Steve, which looks actually quite.
That's pretty funny.
Anyway, so that's kind of in a way how we've been thinking about it. We just need data, and we need it accessible and model. That's kind of, so in a way that's a desire for governance. Is kind of the way I'm sort of thinking about it in this context. But in reality, the scope of governance of data is actually quite large. And this is just a quick list that I put together of the sort of the important things. The ownership and the policy around that is obviously important for data. The lineage, the quality of where it's come from, all of that is very important. How do you know the data is actually what you're looking at? It's very important. The discovery and meaning, which is, I think this industry has been spending a lot of time on, specifically on this, on metadata, on tagging, on semantics. That's all to do with the meaning of the data. Access and security, obviously, that needs to be there. Highly aligned with the sort of the ownership and policy. There's a whole area of compliance, which is all about governance, especially if you're in regulated environments. And don't forget about the life cycle. Data starts, data gets created at some point, and it gets used for however long it gets used, and maybe it gets archived, and maybe it gets deleted. So data is not just when you have it and you're using it for something. It's actually the whole life cycle. And the last bullet point is obviously the world that we live in now. That data has relevance to AI and AI agents in terms of how data can be consumed by AI and AI agents, and also be produced, and how we do that in a sort of structured way that we need to in this industry and these kinds of applications. So I just put this up as a starting point for us to have a discussion around this. I know David has some additional sort of framing of this from an ISO perspective. And David, I suggest we sort of wait a few minutes and have a bit of a discussion around this framing, and then you can come back in about 10 or 15 minutes, something like that. So I'll bring this down and just bring the slide down and just open it up for conversation. And maybe I'll leave it up for a couple of minutes while we're just sort of absorbing it. But open it up to the panel.
And quick comment, shouldn't the last bullet also include humans there too, not just AI and agents? Or is it another bullet, or is it somewhere else?
I think it's probably not in the bullets. It's sort of assume that all of these bullets are for humans, but it's a good point.
Yeah, because they're consuming and producing data from systems would be AI and agents, and I think that term, obviously it's AI and agents, but it's almost interchangeable. I think that part of the time we're involved with it, or a lot of the time, that's part of the governance thing too. I think the human in the loop thing.
Yeah, I've been thinking about it as humans and machines.
Yeah.
They're the sort of the actors in this, humans and machines.
Mm-hmm.
AI and robots being machines, obviously.
Yeah.
And so are buildings. So Steve, where is your damn data in all of this? It's sort of spread out, right?
Yeah, that is the issue. I mean, you could the data, we know where the data is, right? And what all this governance points at is the challenge. You could argue that the up to now, when we think of the challenge of getting to the data, we think of it mostly as a technical one from a communication standpoint. Can I bring internet to that system? Yes or no? Can I get into the building through some sort of firewall? And if I can do at least that, can I then, if I know what the system is and I know it has a common protocol like a BACnet, I'm pretty confident I'll be able to get to the data, right? And what I see in your list, Anto, is that you're going well beyond those basics in terms of, can I get to the data? Meaning physically, can I get to it? Okay. To, I think, correctly identify that if this is going to be done on I'll call it a responsible basis and a well-informed basis, we've got to address things like security. We have to address the who should have access to it, right? So there's going to be potentially compliance issues, like you've got, in Europe now with the was it CSA or CRA, and so it's actually getting more complicated in that sense, not less. But from the standpoint of being able to communicate, if we embrace all of this and lead us to the point where we have specified out the description of what it's really going to take to make this something that can be specified, can be agreed to by the industry and the owners of buildings, so that it addresses all the potential questions that will naturally arise by different interest groups, if you will, IT, management, service providers, etc. In a sense, like it or not, we've got to go down this road if we're going to solve the problem in a way that everybody can sign up to and feel comfortable. You can make, I think you could make the comparison to like for the hardware my company designs. From a safety standpoint, they know they need to take it to UL, and there's a specific chapter in UL that they have to comply with in order to put on the product that it meets that UL standard. And I would argue that we've never had a communication standard, if you will, that says if I submit my product to a standards body, if you, that from a communication standpoint, it's going to have these features that it fully supports. And that would be a game changer. So instead of just sending your product to a UL to make sure it's safe electrically, right? If there was a mechanism or a testing agency that could test against the criteria, the broad criteria that you're outlining in your slide, then businesses or manufacturers and software companies could all, they would know what to do. They would know how to submit their product. They would know how it's going to be tested. They could pre-test it, make sure it all works according to the standard, and then they could get a stamp on their product that they could carry in their literature. And all of a sudden, the problem is essentially resolved for anybody and everybody who wants to sign up for that standard.
I mean, effectively, we did that for BACnet with BTL testing, Steve, but we did not go into the context. And to really get to the next layer, I mean, that's really what Anto is trying to do with CNSCP, is to get to that next layer of contracts and application layer value, which begins to invade the problem domain. And of course, if you're BACnet or any other organization trying to do that, you're boiling the ocean on the problem domain. And what Anto has done in CNSCP is basically broken that down so that, sort of groups of interest, including down to two people that are trying to talk, can help define what element of the ocean they're trying to boil, right? Whereas if you came at it from, I want to be all things to all people for everything I could ever do with the data, it gets to be a pretty daunting problem. Does that make sense?
And I agree with you, Jim. I think that the mechanism, the CNS mechanism, is missing in something like BACnet. So, but it's not limited to BACnet. Obviously, you could apply it across many different communication domains, if you will, and because it doesn't exist today, right, in our industry.
That's right. I view it as solving a different problem, and it happens to be the problem that we need to solve right now, which is how do you, once again, get small pieces of data out of large systems? It might not be a control protocol that in a tight loop does things, but if I want to get large amounts of data out from different enterprise systems in a way that's useful, I think it's going to be very good for that.
Yeah, no, I agree. But do you feel like some of the other items that were on his list, like compliance and some of the other points, are also need to be addressed here?
Absolutely. They all need to be addressed. And what I was going to point out when I looked at this slide is that in the world we live in today, a lot of these things are already implicitly addressed. Right? And that implicit addressing of these things might lead them to be locked in or ossified in the state they're in now and not particularly useful. But if you went down the list here and looked at how these problems are solved today, in several spheres, there is already a solution. It may be narrow, it may be ossified, it may be not useful, but implicit in exchanging any information, a lot of these same subjects are already extant today, right?
Right. Yep.
And I think that, one of the things that we're trying to do here is clear away the ossification and try to get a fresh take at with AI and with other discontinuities, how can we break this open?
And you guys know how I feel about this, is that there's not enough people that realize there's a problem yet. and therefore there aren't enough people that have realized that there's a scale issue, that there's a scaling issue, that there's a And I'm going to go back to the link that I put in the earlier about Netflix. And again, get out to a different industry, get it to a different domain. And if you look at what they describe as their challenge, it's not just governance, but it's the whole damn data thing. They've got a ton of different systems. All of them are none of them talk to each other. And so the first step, and this is one of the things that we are going to be advocating for at C4SB, is that the first step is to identify what all the different systems are. By identifying them, you start to get your head around the fact that, oh, there's going to need to be this higher level of context and a higher level of governance and a higher level of everything. But see, I don't even think people realize it then when you identify stuff that there's still this higher level.
Well, I think that's because you have to go to an even higher level, which is the why. And
Well,
what is it, at that from a top-down perspective, what is it that you can actually do? That would be interesting for people.
I get that. So you got to have the top down, but you got to also have the bottom up. And what Netflix did, and what the Netflix story is about identifying the different systems and then graph the different systems. Now you start to identify the magnitude of the problem that you're looking at, and you start to identify the things you can't do. So at every different enterprise right now, and Netflix is just one of thousands that are going through this process, they're realizing the things they can't do, the decisions they can't make based on the fact that they've got hundreds of different systems and they can't make certain different decisions. PAE is one of those. Large organization with dozens of systems, and they can't make different decisions because the systems have not been orchestrated or coordinated. So we identify the systems. Now let's graph the systems and make it obvious of what the things are that you should be able to do. And that's what Netflix is doing. That's what we're doing with PAE. But I go back to just not enough people are aware of the magnitude of the problem. So therefore, you just can't get people to gather around a campfire and talk about big strategic issues like governance.
I agree with that, and I agree that there is some value to the bottom up. But I do think that actually finding what can be done and presenting it to people will be the motivator that produces enough drive and revenue and interest in the topic to get it done. Right. So if you look at asset management today and a lot of these enterprise management things, there are companies that collect and aggregate data today. And the race right now is to who can get a prettier screen and say the words AI louder, right? Rather than what the actual value is going to be. And to me, it's, looking at those end value propositions is the place you start, because that elucidates what you need to do to get it.
Yeah. But Jim, in my starting comments, I alluded to the idea of having some sort of organization that would, like a UL, right? That would essentially lend credibility to our story.
Mm-hmm.
Because what concerns me, a group of us can talk about this. We've identified the problems. We see the opportunity. So what are your thoughts about approaching, it could be ASHRAE, for example. It doesn't have to be, it could be an existing one as opposed to a UL. But what are your thoughts in that regard about engaging certification, or I'll call it a certification, it could be BTL, I mean, is part of what we're trying to do here, so that it by definition, it gets the attention of a much broader audience than we may be able to generate on our own.
It's a very tricky game, basically. Yep. Having done it once, because the more regulation you bury on something, the more entrepreneurial freedom you take away from it. Mm-hmm. Right? And by normalizing and standardizing that data today, we're going to liberalize a number of applications that could grow. We're also going to choke off a number of them that can't. Mm-hmm. Right? Just by virtue of the decisions that we make now in a world that's changing too quickly for us to know that. So that's why the CNSCP argument is so interesting. Is it because it allows self-segmentation of the communities of practice that are going to figure out how to, that the contracts, if you will, to make that data interchangeable without necessarily precluding others. So, I mean, I'm going to speak against what I just said against, starting top down. If you start top down only, you do focus on certain ideas, which may choke off other ideas. But I still think that the ultimate motivator is to start at the top. But I also think that setting up any standard which needs to be rigidly adhered to needs to be rigidly written and enforced. And that's just really tough to do across domains. And what I would say to you now is that even groups like Underwriters Labs or the Independent Test Labs, they're in very narrow domains, right?
For sure.
So EMI interference or electrical safety, fire alarm certification. These are very, very narrow fields. And what we're talking about is going in the other direction. It's broad.
Okay.
David, do you want, just wondering, David, if this is a good time to interject your perspective?
Sure. So I've worked with a number of organizations and developers and investors on what it looks like to do this governance throughout the whole development process. There are three ways to enter into this process. One is through acquisition of a new asset. The second is to build a new asset. And the third is to take an asset that's already owned and go through this inventory process. And the term that I've been using is a digital development workflow. And the current development workflow that is used and acquisition workflow is very paper-based still, and productivity, especially in construction, is ridiculously low. And what the effort of this little deck I'm sharing with today with all of you is to share the ISO 19650 process, which gives a governance framework to all of this. And this digital workflow provides organizations with a clear path, not just for their projects, but also for the process they use internally to manage the data and the governance of the data as well. Oh, and this is just standard BIM stuff, but it's like, if you get this stuff dialed in at the beginning of your project or the beginning of acquisition or whatever it is, it's a lot easier to manage and change things, which is, everybody's seen the diagram on the right, I'm sure. So this diagram about the stages of the analog and digital information management transition. The stage one stuff was when AutoCAD was introduced. Stage two, and stage one still included the original BIM work, but stage two is really BIM happening since around 2005 to now. And stage three is where there's a digital information management model and there's a technology layer. And in the world of BIM, the common data environment, or CDE, is where all of this goes and all of this information is stored. And the fact that this diagram has been around for 20 years and we're still stuck at stage two is really a testament to how pathetic the industry is and also our productivity. But if this stuff is adopted, it'll reduce risk, improve certainty, lower costs, and all of that other good stuff. So how does this work? the requirements for the data need to be in the RFPs. The owner, in this case, is the appointing party at the top of the little diagram. And they put the requirements and information exchange requirements in the appointment documents, i.e. the RFPs. And that's given to the architect, who would be the lead appointed party. And the engineers and consultants would be other appointed parties. Or in construction, the lead appointed party would be the GC or CM at risk. And then all the subs would be the appointed parties underneath. But the idea here is that there are information deliverables from all parties that come back to the owner. And it's up to the owner to say what those are. So a digital development workflow enables efficiency across all organizations. It enables owners to support more assets with a leaner staff. And it also reduces risk and all of that other good stuff with operational efficiency through design, construction, and operations, as well as disposition or the sale of assets. But this process is already in use across Europe. The projects, I'm familiar with many projects that use this process in the UK as well as in the Middle East. And the process is becoming more and more formalized every year, where there's a document that's called the Exchange Information Requirements in the RFPs. And that lays out the digital workflow. So actually, and let's go back to the why. Why bother doing this? It really just enables every stage of ownership to work better, more efficiently, and you reduce risk and lower costs. And this is especially important with design and construction, because real estate investors, so we're talking private equity type and institutional investors, they think the more risk there is, the more their equity return should be. And they say there's a lot of risk, and typically there is, but there's also ways to clearly mitigate the risk during design and construction to justifiably lower the equity investors' anticipated returns because the risk is lower. But all of this why and digital workflow works equally well for schools, hospitals, universities, any organization. So this is not in any way, shape, or form limited to the private sector. So what is it? A digital development workflow, I'm going to read this one bullet point, is a data-driven design, construction, and operations process where all project information is entered only once and then can be shared and passed on in as automated a manner as possible to all collaborators and stakeholders. And the key thing here is entering it in once. So much of everything we do in real estate is copy and paste or hand moving data over from one place to another because we don't have our data organized well. So we look to do this for design and construction, for asset management or the CFO's side of managing real estate, but also to optimize facility and property management and help with OpEx and CapEx. This actually also helps with improving tenant experience, which lowers turnover and vacancy as well. So what are the primary recommendations for something like this? Adopt Open BIM, adopt IFC, adopt ISO 19650, which I'll talk to even more about in this presentation, but also ISO 14000, which is all about carbon reporting. So this is what's used in Europe and the Middle East and Asia to track. Actually, it's used in the US too for the energy industry and for the pharmaceutical industry. ISO 14064 is how you report your operational carbon and embodied carbon. And these are well-known standards and used across the world, just not in the US really. But this is how all of our building performance data actually gets rolled up into investment and accounting data. And then owners also adopt an assembly-based approach to building asset management and leverage uniformat and master format. So there are 6 parts to ISO 19650. I'm going to jump straight to 5, which is security. Everybody always talks about the need for security and cybersecurity and all. Yes, that's an absolute given, and that's absolutely a part of this governance framework. But to go back up to number 1, the first ISO 19650.1 lays out all these concepts. The images and diagrams I stole are stolen from point 1 at the very beginning. And then point 2 is, dot 2 is about delivery, dot 3 is about operations, dot 4 is about the information exchange, and then 6, which is still in process, is about health and safety, but think OSHA and stuff like that. But the ISO 19650 governance and guidance framework provides organizations a roadmap to do all of this. How does this actually get implemented, though? This is when we get into what's called the exchange information requirements, which go into the RFPs for design teams, construction teams, and for the operational teams. And I talk about developing an embodied and operational carbon tracking methodology, but this is stuff that's already happening in the US and elsewhere, but is missing in the US real estate market. And then leveraging IFC standards throughout the workflow, both in theory and practice. So here's a bunch of abbreviations and acronyms, but it's really great to help everyone wrap their head around this whole thing. So in the middle of the slide, we have the design and construction process. All of the data from everyone goes into the common data environment, or CDE, and all of that data together is called the project information model. When you get to operations and maintenance and management, as well as decommissioning or disposition, that's called the asset information model. So it's all the data, and it's actually mostly real-time transactional data that is collected once the building is operated or in operation, because all the information about the physical building was created in the project information model. So think of the project information model more as your static master data, and then the asset information model is mostly performance data and transactional data. Now, going over to the left-hand side, all of this data and how the organization uses it are referred to as the OIR, or Organizational Information Requirements. Those organizational information requirements are divided into the project information requirements for the project information model and the asset information requirements for the asset information model in operations. All of that is rolled together into the EIR document, which is your exchange information requirements. And to make it even simpler, here's how it rolls up. You have your OIRs, and here's some examples of what those OIR sources could be. And then you have your AIR and your PIR, and then you have your EIR, which wraps all that up. Now I'm covering this in a very simple way. This slide is actually 5 years old. So I have probably a better version of things to put under each one of these, but all of it rolls up into the EIR requirements, which goes into the RFPs. And once it's part of the contracted delivery, that's how you get all of this to happen. And that's how it gets priced and included from the very beginning. So it's not an add-alt or any of that. And the most important thing I can stress here is that this information should be owned by the owner. The design team, the architects, the engineers, they are creating a collaborative work, just like a movie. And so all of this data, the model, think of it like a movie where you have your director, cinematographer, all these different team members who contribute to the collaborative work. But that collaborative work, just like a movie owned by a studio, the model is owned by the owner. And that also goes for construction as well. A lot of architects like to think they own the design or own the data, but technically their work is a work for hire. And I'm sure Kimon and I could debate this, but at the end of the day, it's to everyone's advantage and risk advantage for the owner to own the data as opposed to the design team or the construction team. So that's a quick overview. Yeah.
Can we open this up for
please.
a discussion? Thoughts from others? Kimon, you must have some thoughts.
Yeah, this is great overview, David. Have you looked at all at the new ISO 19650 update that they're shifting the focus away from BIM and more to information modeling? I haven't looked at that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This deck is actually, I repurposed it from a long time ago, but all of the thoughts and concepts still ring true in terms of the categories of data and things like that.
Yeah. So as you know, I'm on Building Smart US on the building committee. So I'm very much in tune with all this and been supporting it for years. But I also think, as we know, there's been struggles with this whole file exchange and waiting for design and construction and waiting for things to be perfect and nothing gets into operations. And then also the big challenge of existing buildings. There's kind of a theory or that you create a perfect BIM and you can do the existing buildings where I think in C4SP in the discussions we had, you kind of have to come from two directions, right? And they can meet in the middle, I think, with all this. But I think it's important to acknowledge that. And I think Building Smart is trying to shift that. I know there's been success stories of it, but overall it's been kind of flat as far as innovations and how do you deal with the complexity of BIM and existing facilities and the need for operations, which is as you noted, very different from design and construction. And I hope that in the discussions we're having here at Monday Live and with C4SP, that we can shift that conversation. And I know that IFC has been trying to shift to the next version, and they've had these struggles up and down. So it's just kind of but there's no more time. Basically, everything has to accelerate now. So what do we do with all this? I don't know what the right answer is here, other than can't be just focused on one workflow. We can't wait for design and construction to be perfect in the contract to get data to deliver for buildings, especially if we have most buildings are existing and portfolios are big.
Absolutely. That's why at the very beginning I talked about there are 3 points of entry, being ground up construction or acquisition or doing this process on a portfolio you already have. I know it works. I've done it with clients. I've seen it done with many organizations around the world. And I have to say the US is woefully behind in thinking, just the concept like, could it all work? Well, yes, it actually already works. And it's been happening for over 20 years with certain organizations. Like British Rail has this stuff dialed in, and they have great tools for dialing into any station, any crossing. They have all of the data about every piece of equipment, everything for days. So it's not that things aren't perfect. It's that I feel owners lack the vision to actually see this implemented, because it obviously is happening.
Is that why it hasn't happened, David, in the States? It's owners.
I think
it's
so,
owners. That the contracts are not requiring it, they're not checking it, and then meanwhile architects are not delivering it. They're saying that's our IP, we're not delivering it. So they use these BIMs and they flatten them down into PDFs.
And what's agreed, Kimon, but I also think that I know from being in the design world with architects and engineers and being on those teams trying to sell owners on these concepts, I think I think we have a cultural problem across the board because the value stories that design teams come with or facility managers come with obviously don't resonate with owners or leadership because this stuff hasn't happened in the US.
Let me just say that British Rail is going to own that railroad system for the next 2,000 years. And the owner's going to ditch that building at 7. So, I mean,
Yeah.
is there an economic problem that's driving
But
this?
no, I mean, but that university is going to own the building for 200 years too.
Yes. Yes.
So, you know, why isn't it happening in better and more organizations? And of course, there are exceptions in the United States. Cornell University is totally on top of its game with energy management and facility and portfolio management.
But wait, we've got a Cornell employee that's actually on the call that would probably
fantastic.
beg to differ.
Oh, they may suck
how
now.
they're
I
on
haven't
top of
talked to them in
everything
years,
perfectly.
but no, I would love to hear.
I'm just
Cornell
saying,
employee or alumni?
Yeah.
I don't know. Where's Joel work these days?
He works at Cornell.
He's laughing. That's great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Steve and I both are Cornell alums too.
Yeah.
So okay, well, congratulations.
There we go.
You know where I'm going to go. It's like, I do not believe blaming owners for being too stupid to understand what's good for them is a good business practice. That's, I'm just going to say it a little more boldly.
Telling your customers are stupid usually isn't a great way to close it.
Well, but I would argue,
but,
Rick, that this cultural problem needs to be shown for what it is. And I found, like, when I was at Arup, we had our digital smart building practice. And in my past life, I'd put scope into every proposal that went out to any client, whether they asked for it or not. And we'd chase everything. And by the time I got to like 2013, I stopped because trying to tell the value story to someone who didn't get it just became too exhausting. Because the projects themselves are just exhausting. And so
I don't disagree. I'm just saying that we're taking a different tack. We're taking a different
I totally agree.
So
where I got to is, like, if the owner asks for it and they have scope in their RFP all day long, we'd love to go talk to them. But convincing people is too hard.
I'm like a broken record, and I'm sorry. I'll just up at some
I am
point.
too.
Every owner that I talk to can articulate the desire to have more interoperability and systems that work together. When we talk about the idea of having a graph of graphs so that they can be able to query a consistent set of data, everybody's like, "Oh yeah, we absolutely want that." So I don't, and what I believe we haven't done, although it is kind of fun to have Joel on the call because I talked about it earlier. BACnet to RDF is a proposal that's going to actually wake a bunch of people up to be able to show, oh, wait a minute, there's that data, or those systems are actually available in a knowledge graph. So AI can actually look at them. That's going to wake a bunch of people up to something that's now possible that has not been possible before. And we're also going to show how the different systems at PAE can now be queried by AI. We demonstrated that last week, by the way. So by actually showing that these systems can actually be created to be bubbled up, then people will start to say, well, you know what? We probably need to govern this at scale. We need to think about how this is going to go crazy. But the idea of trying to create governance before you get awareness is what I'm getting at. And you've heard me say this before too. There's just haven't been enough accidents at the town square to realize that we need to have a traffic light there.
Or conversely, the cost of energy has been too low.
Energy doesn't matter. We've proven over the last 20 years that no one cares about energy.
In the US, Rick, in the US, that's actually a driver outside the US.
But it's not a driver here. So
I understand.
What we have to do is we have to bubble up enough of these examples to where people become aware of the problem and vendors start to actually provide solutions that are consistent.
But when are the price signals going to come, Rick, from the market to the engineering and architecture community that this is something that people want to buy and they're going to put money on the table for?
Well, I think that they are saying that, and that's where, again, we aren't having a problem finding the engineers and architects that want to adopt this new technology that we're demonstrating and take it to their customers because their customers have been begging for it.
But that's not what Kimon has told us before in terms of the architectural community, right?
Is it changing? Well, no, it's not changing with the entire architectural community. A lot of them are retrenching, just like is happening everywhere else. People are saying, oh no, I need to be able to go put a walled garden around my value add because I can't figure out how else I'm going to possibly survive. The ones that are innovative and the ones that have an abundance mentality are saying, oh, let's embrace these new standards and take things to more places.
Right.
Anyway, this excites me, obviously. So I'm being, and I think we need good debates like this.
I like
me too.
triggering you, Rick. I really do.
So
But
good at it.
the thing though that I think is important, which is why, we're all investing time into C4SB, is that we really have to have better implementable solutions. And this is where I feel the bottom up is doing this due diligence and doing the work we're doing with C4SB. And then the top down is messaging the value story and the why, to Jim's point. So I think we need to do both concurrently. And it's going to be the organizations that wake up to this first that will outperform the market or outperform their peers.
Yeah, and the C4SB is interesting because it is an existing building technically. We technically had to go get the stuff that was not in this common data environment, that was not in IFC, that was not any of that. But then we finally got it, and now it can be repeated with an existing building, basically with the data that's there. So that's why I'm saying it's both. If it exists there, so next time they're going to do it, they are going to use more of a format that's standardized and everything. But that shouldn't stop us from saying, and if there's an existing building, it's solvable as well too.
Anno, do you want to chime in to this? You've been very quiet.
Yeah, I can, but I've only got 1 minute left, and I'm going to hard stop. I've seen the smart building stuff as everyone said too before, but the biggest challenge I have is the existing. How do you get this into the existing places? And I'm kind of, you guys know me. I'm on Brian Turner's camp of MCPs and AI agents are going to solve this probably faster than we could probably ever work it out. I mean, MCPs are going out at a great rate of knots. I think I saw an announcement from just, what's his name? Not Brian, but Brian's brother.
Andy.
Andy, thank you. Andy and Normal. He's just wrote an MCP for the Normal platform, and he's done a good little write-up as to, what it did. Kind of interesting. And then I think the last comment is, as a property manager, not owner, I will tell you the problem is always put on us. The building owner is like, you got to go work it out, right? We get a new contract, we take over a new client, a new customer. The first thing they tell us is you got to go work out all the assets and all the details and stuff. It's your problem. You bought it. You solve it for me. So it's building owners, they keep pushing the problem off.
Okay. Steve, do you have a perspective on what David presented? Which is, I see that as being a very formal way of thinking about governance.
Yeah, I'm trying to recall I think it was called EIR.
Correct.
The EIR.
Correct.
Yeah.
Information exchange requirement.
Yeah. So David, my question to you on that is, it would seem that document or requirements, if you will, is going to be different customer to customer, design firm to design firm, right?
It could be, but at the same time, I've used the same outline format for multiple different clients, and it depends on the systems they already have in place.
Okay.
And I just modify it based upon the organization.
I mean, I conceptually, I love the whole concept. So my concern is how does it get broadly adopted? I mean, you're seeing it happen, like you said, in Europe. It's not been happening here. When engineers look for specifications, they go asking for, do you have a specification like this? And they look for someone like you to help them write a spec on a particular part of the project. So that's my only concern is how do we get some consistency or some buy-in to this EIR concept and do it in such a way that people are comfortable using.
For sure. And I think there's,
right?
yeah, I think there's a way to start in easy ways, which is like the design team has to hand over their BIM model in native format and just best practices across the board about using uniformat and master format and all of that good stuff. So I think there's plenty of stuff that is already happening that isn't formalized that just could easily be formalized. And then there are some obvious steps to take from there. But I apologize, gents, I have to drop.
Yeah.
So thanks, everybody.
Yeah, and we need to wrap as well.
Yeah, I gotta go as well.
Yeah. Okay. So let us wrap. This has been a really good conversation, I think. Ken is nodding, which is always a good sign. So we'll get the video up, and Ken will get the article up, and you guys have a great week, and we'll meet again next week.
Thanks.
Great.
Bye all.
Bye-bye.